Hi, I'm Linda. Glad to have you back. I did a winter scene this time. It has kind of an old-fashioned feel to it, maybe the early 1900s or late 1800s where they had firewood for heat. So there's a couple here walking towards their farm, landscape with snow, lots of trees here, a few leaves left on, a little mountain in the back, even a little dog. I know you're going to love doing this one. So pause and paint with me, stream me. So let's get started. So here are the oil paints I used. Liquid white, titanium white, black, phthalo blue, Prussian blue, Van Dyke brown, burnt sienna, sap green, alizarin crimson, yellow ochre, cad yellow, orange, and red. And you'll see I've got the bottom left center, a couple that I had etched in ahead of time. So in the meantime, I'm putting liquid white all over my canvas. A little light, just a light coat all over. Very, very light. And I'll be taking a shop towel, shop rag, and gently going over my canvas, taking the excess white off, because I just don't want too much. Just a very, very light coat. So I'm going into a little phthalo blue and just a touch of white, very, very light blue sky. I'm not going all the way to the right because there's going to be a bunch of trees right there, so you don't have to go all the way. But it's going to be kind of a, well, I don't want to say stormy, but snow is brewing, and it's going to be darker on the sides and a little darker in the center. But I'll be going back and forth, blending, creating kind of a stormy, snowy, cloudy sky. So I want to angle across, so I'm going to switch. There we go. I'm going straight across. I took a little Prussian and I'm making some darker clouds up there to create kind of a stormy, snowy, brewing sky. Kind of hard to explain, but it's a darker sky up there. So I'm just putting some Prussian blue up there, and I take a little 1-inch dry and just do some circular motions to soften that up. Taking little hairs or whatever off the brush that's on the canvas. You don't want those on there. But just blending that sky up. However you want, actually. You can make it however you want. This is kind of a storm brewing in the sky, snow coming. So I'm going to go about halfway down, leaving some white streaks in there. Give it a little variation. And just buffing it out. Creating some lines in there just to give it smoothness. Okay, so I'm going into a little bit of darker phthalo blue with a touch of Prussian and a touch of alizarin crimson. I want kind of a dark purple. I'm making a faraway mountain in the back. So I'm etching that in with a little filbert, just etching that little mountain way in the distance. I don't want it real big, but it's going to be kind of a long one. It's going to stretch over by the horizon there. the horizon line. So I'm just etching carefully how I want that old mountain to look. And so I'm bringing down some of that dark color, just bringing it down. And there's going to be some light areas in there too. So it's far in the distance, so it doesn't have to be real detailed. So I'm just adding some more color. I'm going to stretch it over to the left there. It's going to be a bunch of trees right there on the left side, so you don't have to go all the way to the side. Now I'm just kind of brushing up with a clean, dry brush. Some of that white will come up in there. Kind of just tap it in. Just create a little foggy effect at the base of that mountain. And then brush across. So I've got a fan brush and I've got some Van Dyke brown with a touch of sienna. I'm just making some far away distant trees way in the back at the base of that mountain. Just tapping really light, creating a line of trees, pushing upwards, and gradually going upwards to the right there. You don't have to be real fussy. There's going to be some trees right there, but you just want to get that line of trees where you want it there. And then just bringing some of that brown land down underneath. And underneath the mountain, the base, lifting upward, creating some little trees there. Very, very distant. Okay, so now I'm going into a little bit of the Van Dyke brown with a touch of black. I'm going to make some tiny trees way in the back. I'm using my palette knife. And I'm just going to go straight up. And you can create little distant trees way in the distance by just putting a little roll on that short edge of your knife. Just pushing upward. So I'm going into a little bit of burnt sienna and Van Dyke brown. Maybe with a touch of red or orange. I'm going to make some far distant leaves on the back of those tops of those trees. And more of the Van Dyke brown and a little burnt sienna. I'm etching out at the base of that mountain. I am putting a little tree right there. I've got a tiny little script brush. I'm just going to go up and put a little tree right there on that little landmass right at the base of that mountain. It doesn't have to be real tall, but just a little tree with a few little branches. And I'm going to put another tree off to the right there. It's going to be a little bit taller. And I take my little script brush and I just kind of roll it with my fingers upward, and I can create some little tiny little branches on that. And I've added three more trees there. with a liner brush, just ever so small, because they are in the distance, so you don't want them real thick, real big. They're tall, but they're not very big around. Just putting some little branches on. They're not all the way to the top, so now I'm taking a little 1-inch, I just dipped in a little bit of the Van Dyke brown and a little bit, tiny bit of orangish red, and I'm just tapping the tops of those trees. I'm putting some leaves on there, way at the top, and then a little bit in the middle, just to give it a little color. It's late fall, and all those leaves have not fallen off yet, so there are some leaves back there. And dipped in some more of the Van Dyke brown with a tiny bit of alizarin crimson and Van Dyke brown. And I'm just filling in that side there. That's kind of a grove of trees right there, and that goes all the way to the top. So now after I've put that in, I'm putting some pine trees back there. And that's with some sap green, a little bit of phthalo blue. It's a dark, very dark color. I even probably added a little black to that, but I wanted it a very, very dark evergreen. And I'll be putting a few more, one next to it, and probably another couple more in the front of those trees, just to fill in the gaps there, distant trees, variations. And there's another small one there. So I've created a little bit of a hill there. That's going to be a snowy hill, which I've already got the white down. So, and I've accented with a little bit of the Van Dyke brown with a fan brush. Now I'm pushing up with a little bit of white back there, a little bit of snow on those branches, and the brush that's in front of those trees, and just angling my hill, kind of slanting downward. And I'm putting in a couple of big boulders way in the distance with a little white on the palette knife, a little bit of dark base there on the rock. Not a whole lot of detail there, but from a distance, it's going to look pretty nice. So now I've taken my fan brush, and I've dipped it in a little bit of the Van Dyke brown, tiny bit of the burnt sienna, and I'm just kind of scratching in some grasses, just laying the landscape out in a downward motion, adding a little bit of yellow ochre in that. So now I am putting a few trees back there with the Van Dyke brown, touch of black. They're very, very dark. And they're going to be in front of those pine trees. You won't really see them much until after we highlight those. But you'll know they're there. I'm coming down into the landscape so you can see the bottom of the tree there. They're going to be big old oak trees. They're not very big. They're kind of medium sized, but they're nice landscape trees. Just working my way over, getting a few more of those bigger trees in there. So now I'm putting the groundwork in for another big boulder that's going to be laying right there. I'm putting some darker grays, black with a little bit of white. Just going to put a big old boulder there. It's going to have some snow on top, so I'm just putting the dark in right now. And then you'll see I use the palette knife, the short end, and I'm just going to gently go over the top of that. And then you'll see that rock come in. So now I am putting some white branches, little snowy, frosty branches on those trees. And that's the liner brush with a touch of liquid white and titanium white. It's not real thick. It's kind of a thinner paint, which it flows on really nice if it's not very thick. And it's just kind of squiggly little lines that etching out those tree branches. Those are on the last of the trees that put in. Those trees have these little snowy branches that are just kind of hanging there ever so, and kind of fun to put on. They squiggle downward. Takes a little practice, but it's a very, very light touch. And I'm doing some more groundwork, working my way forward with the fan brush, angling the snow. I'm adding a little bit of phthalo, very, very pale phthalo blue in there. And just keeping the line of the hill. I want to make sure it's kind of going downward into a little valley there. That couple is walking off to the center. Can't really see them right now, but they're in there. And the phthalo blue, very light. And then at the very, very bottom front, I put a little bit of the yellow ochre with some Van Dyke brown there. It looks kind of like a reddish brown. I'm just putting some groundwork in there for this big old log that's going to lay there. Adding a little bit of orange, touch of red. And fairly dark on the left corner, very dark, and a big old tree right there, a couple of trees, but I'm just blending that in, pushing upward, creating some grassies. So now I'm putting a big old, the side of a pine tree that's hugging the side of that canvas. Not a lot of it's going to show, but it's going to be very, very close to this big old tree that I'm going to put in there. And I'm putting in a smaller tree. Wanted to put that in first because I didn't want to hide my trees in the background. Wanted to make sure it was angled in there just right. So with the liner, I'm just going all the way to the top. Just etching it out. And on the left side, I've kind of etched out where that big old tree's going to be. Just carefully putting some Van Dyke brown and very dark black. It's a very dark color. Filling in. Just filling in now. I'll be highlighting these trees with a palette knife in a few minutes here. But I want to get these branches so there's the palette knife. I've got a little bit of burnt sienna with a touch of orange. I just just tapping the sides of that tree, giving it a little bit of color, and same with the big one. Try and follow the line there, just tapping some color in. And I did put some rocks down on the bottom with very dark gray and black, and with the palette knife I put a little bit of white snow on them. So now I'm just putting in some tiny little branches with a liner, just ever so, putting some small ones that are coming out. I don't want to have them very heavy. They're very, very light. And so the paint has to be quite thin. Otherwise you're not going to get that sharp those little lines. And working on some branches on the big tree. Same thing with the Van Dyke Brown, touch of black. Just squiggling those little branches out. Takes practice. It's very, very light touch. And now I'm highlighting that tree with some cad yellow and a tiny touch of orange, just on the tops of those arms of those branches, tops there. Just tapping very light touches. And you can create the bark look on the front of that tree by just tapping downward. So now I'm going to put my people in, my couple, starting out with the man's jacket. And I've got kind of a rusty red. It's red with a touch of brown. Oh, that's the lady. Okay, sorry. That lady's got a sweater or something over her head, a cape. And I made that kind of an orangey red. And her bottom of her dress is kind of an olive green, sap green with a little bit of yellow. And she's going to have an apron on, so I'm going to make the front part of that dress with a little bit of a yellow apron. Now the man, I've got his jacket a little bit darker, kind of a rusty red, a little darker, and the pants are dark brown. So he'll show up pretty good against that snow. I just etched those out. I had my carbon paper and these people drawn out on Mylar, and I just laid it up there and traced it out. Now I'm putting a couple of logs on his shoulder, and they're black. And I'm putting the little dog in there, the little beagle. And it's Van Dyke Brown with a touch of red. Very, very light. I added some white. Wanted in brown and white. And that little script brush, it's very small. It's like a size 2, I think. But the brushes, or the bristles, they're not very long. They're thin and sharp points on them. I really like using those for detail work. Okay, so I got my people in there and the dog, and now I'm working on that big old log in front. And the Van Dyke Brown, I'll have to put some black with that over that white snow to make it show up, or scrape some of that white off. and just work on getting that dark fallen tree there. And after you've filled that in, I took the palette knife, dipped it in a little bit of white. I'm just tapping on some snow, like a little snow on there. There's so much detail in this painting. You can always go back and fill in and make it how you want. I'm putting in some little brushes, little tiny trees that are coming probably off of that. And just squiggling in some little grassies, however you want. Okay, now I've got my little sponge that I'm making some leaves with. I've dipped that in some alizarin crimson and red, touch of orange. And I'm just filling in here and there in that big old tree some leaves that have not fallen yet. Some big old oak leaves. Now this brush I'm dipping straight down in that same color, and I'm going to tap in ever so light on those branches some tiny, tiny little leaves, very light. And I'm going to do that here and there. Doesn't have to be a lot. Just here and there, put a little color on those branches. Well, I almost see a finished painting here. Boy, I really like doing this one, and I hope you do too. So until next time, happy painting, and God bless.